His grip crushed my wrist as the fluorescent lights of Maplewood's community bank blurred above me. "Sign the deed, Natalie. Hand over your property or you'll regret it." The growl came from Dennis Crawford, the homeowners association president who had terrorized our neighborhood for years. His voice was low enough that only I could hear, but the threat reverberated through my entire body. I'd never imagined my life in quiet Maplewood, Illinois would come to this, being physically intimidated in broad daylight, in a public place, with no one stepping in to help. Then again, I never imagined many things about this town when I first arrived with dreams of a peaceful life. Dennis's wife, Sylvia, stood beside him, her manicured nails digging into my other arm. Her smile remained perfectly fixed, positioned just right for the security cameras. A casual observer might have thought we were old friends, sharing a private moment. They wouldn't see her nails breaking my skin or the threatening whispers. "Such a simple thing," Sylvia cooed, her breath hot against my ear. "Just sign the paper and all these unpleasantries will be over." My townhouse wasn't much by some standards, a modest 2-bedroom with a small garden I'd painstakingly brought to life over the past 2 years. But it was mine. Every mortgage payment represented hours of freelance design work, late nights hunched over my computer, and clients I'd fought to win. It was the first place I'd ever truly owned, and they wanted to take it from me, just like they'd taken homes from other neighbors who couldn't fight back. I said no. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "This is extortion, Dennis. You can't just make up violations to force people out of their homes." Dennis's face reddened. He was a former contractor, built like someone who had once done physical labor but had gone soft around the middle. His hand tightened around my wrist until I could feel my pulse throbbing against his palm. "You think anyone cares about your complaints?" He leaned closer. "Everyone in this town knows me. I've been running Maplewood Estates for 15 years. You're just another entitled millennial who doesn't understand how communities work." Behind the teller counter, a young cashier was watching us with uncertain eyes. I could see her debating whether to intervene. Beside her stood other bank employees, all carefully looking away. That's how it had always been in Maplewood. People noticed the Crawfords' behavior but pretended not to see. With my free hand, I reached for the pen Dennis had thrown onto the counter. He loosened his grip slightly, triumph flashing in his eyes as he thought I was surrendering. Instead, I pulled a deposit slip toward me and scrawled 5 words. "Help. Being forced." When I slid the note across the counter to the cashier, her eyes widened. She glanced from the note to my face, then to Dennis's hand still gripping my wrist. Something changed in her expression, hesitation giving way to determination. She stepped back and whispered something to a colleague. Dennis was too busy gloating to notice. "Smart choice, Brooks. You never had a chance, fighting the whole community." "I'm not fighting the community," I said. "I'm fighting you. There's a difference." Just then, a door opened behind the teller counter, and a man in a crisp white shirt and navy tie emerged. His nameplate read, "Martin Lopez, branch manager." He was probably in his mid-40s, with kind eyes that hardened as he took in the scene. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice carrying. Across the bank's lobby, Dennis immediately released my wrist, his demeanor shifting like someone had flipped a switch. "No problem at all. Just helping Ms. Brooks with some paperwork for the neighborhood association." Martin's eyes fell to my wrist, where angry red marks were already forming. Then he looked at the note still sitting on the counter. "Ms. Brooks, would you like to step into my office for a moment?" he asked, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a question. "She's fine right here," Sylvia interjected, her fingers still digging into my arm. "We're almost done." Martin's gaze remained steady on me. "Ms. Brooks?" In that moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced since moving to Maplewood. Someone was actually seeing me, actually willing to help. My eyes burned, with unexpected tears. "Yes," I whispered. "I'd like that very much." Martin reached beneath the counter and pressed something. Only later would I learn it was the silent alarm. He then opened the half door separating the teller area from the lobby. "Please join me," he said. "Mr. and Mrs. Crawford, I think it would be best if you waited out here." Dennis's face contorted. "Now listen here." "Security will be here momentarily," Martin cut in, his voice firm but professional. "And the police have already been called, so I suggest you both take a seat and wait quietly." The lobby had gone completely silent. Other customers were now openly staring, their attention drawn by the confrontation. I could see faces I recognized, neighbors from Maplewood Estates who had suffered under Dennis's reign just like me. As Martin guided me toward his office, I caught Mrs. Patel from 3 doors down watching with wide eyes. The Nguyen family from across the street had stopped mid-transaction. Even old Mr. Fitzgerald, who Dennis had nearly forced into foreclosure last year, stood frozen by the entrance. All of them had been victims. All of them were witnesses now. In Martin's office, my composure finally broke. My hands shook uncontrollably as I sank into the chair he offered. "They've been doing this for years," I said, the words tumbling out. "Making up violations, imposing ridiculous fines, threatening people until they give up their homes. Then they flip the properties for profit or rent them out through their own company." I took a shuddering breath. I'm just the latest target. But I refused to be bullied. Martin listened intently, his expression growing more troubled with each word. When I finished, he slid a tissue box toward me. "You're not alone anymore, Ms. Brooks," he said. "And I think it's time Maplewood learned exactly what's been happening in their community." Outside the glass walls of his office, I could see police officers entering the bank. Dennis and Sylvia were gesturing angrily, their usual intimidation tactics failing as other customers, my neighbors, began approaching the officers. One by one, they were finding their voices. One by one, they were telling their stories. For the first time since I'd moved to Maplewood, I felt something like hope. I bought my townhouse in Maplewood 2 years ago, flush with optimism and the largest commission check I'd ever earned as a freelance designer. After spending my 20s bouncing between cramped apartments and taking whatever projects would pay the bills, I finally had something that was mine, something permanent. The real estate agent had mentioned the HOA fees in passing, describing them as standard for the area. What she hadn't mentioned was that Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association was essentially a small fiefdom ruled by Dennis Crawford and his inner circle. My first encounter with Dennis came just 3 weeks after moving in. I was planting wildflowers along my front walkway when his shadow fell across the garden bed. "Those aren't approved plantings," he said without introduction. I looked up, squinting against the afternoon sun. "Excuse me? The HOA has strict guidelines about approved landscaping. Native wildflowers aren't on the list." He handed me a violation notice, already filled out. The fine was $150. "But they're drought-resistant and good for local pollinators," I argued, "and my neighbor has the exact same flowers." Dennis's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Henderson has been here 20 years. She's grandfathered in. You'll need to remove these by Friday or face an additional fine." That was my introduction to life under the Maplewood Estates HOA. The fines kept coming after that. $200 for a mailbox that was 2 inches taller than regulation. $300 for leaving my trash can visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection. $175 for Christmas lights that remained up 3 days past the January 5th deadline. I tried appealing at the monthly HOA meeting, but Dennis controlled those proceedings with an iron fist. When I raised my hand to speak, he would either ignore me completely or cut me off mid-sentence. "We have other business to attend to," he'd say, moving swiftly to the next agenda item while Sylvia, who served as the association's secretary, smirked beside him. The other homeowners watched in uncomfortable silence. Some gave me sympathetic glances, but no one dared speak up. I later learned why. It was Elena Ramirez, my neighbor to the left, who finally explained the situation over coffee one Sunday morning. She invited me over after we both took our trash out at the same time, one of those rare moments when Dennis wasn't prowling the neighborhood with his clipboard. "Dennis targets anyone who doesn't fall in line," she told me, her voice barely above a whisper despite us being inside her kitchen. "First, it's the fines. If you pay without complaint, he might ease up. If you fight back, he escalates." "Escalates how?" I asked. Elena's eyes darted to her window. "You've seen the rental properties scattered throughout the neighborhood? Most of those used to be owned by people who stood up to Dennis. He buried them in fines until they couldn't afford to stay. Then he or his friends would swoop in with lowball offers when they were desperate. I thought about the violation notices piling up on my counter. That's illegal. It has to be." "Maybe," Elena shrugged. "But who's going to stop him? He's been president for 15 years. His brother-in-law is on the town council. His college roommate is the sheriff. What about voting him out?" Elena laughed bitterly. "The HOA bylaws were rewritten years ago. Only property owners who've lived here 5 years or longer can vote or run for the board. And guess who owns most of those properties now? Either directly or through family members." I left Elena's house that day with a clearer understanding of what I was up against. But unlike many of my neighbors, I didn't have a family to protect or deep roots in the community. I had nothing to lose except my home. and I wasn't giving that up without a fight. My resistance started small. I researched HOA laws in Illinois and discovered that many of Dennis's violations were unenforceable. I sent certified letters contesting each fine, citing specific statutes, and demanding proper hearings as required by law. The response was swift. Sylvia Stanton Crawford appeared at my door one evening, her smile as practiced and hollow as a pageant contestant's. "Natalie, darling," she cooed, "Dennis and I are concerned about you. All these challenges you're making, it's creating such unnecessary tension." "I'm just exercising my rights as a homeowner," I replied, blocking my doorway so she couldn't enter. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "Rights come with responsibilities, like being a good neighbor, like understanding how things work here." She leaned closer. "This isn't going to end well for you if you continue. We've dealt with troublemakers before." After she left, I found my car had been keyed from headlight to taillight. No proof it was her, of course, but the message was clear. The intimidation escalated over the following months. Anonymous notes appeared under my door suggesting I save everyone trouble and just move. My clients began receiving emails claiming I was unreliable and missed deadlines, damaging accusations for a freelancer whose reputation is everything. I installed security cameras, which Dennis promptly declared a violation of HOA privacy rules. When I refused to take them down, he had them vandalized while I was away visiting my mother. Throughout it all, I documented everything. Every fine, every threat, every accidental encounter where Dennis or Sylvia would bump into me at the local grocery store and mention how much easier life would be if I just played by the rules. I kept reaching out to my neighbors, trying to build alliances. Some were sympathetic but afraid. Others had been in Dennis's pocket for so long they saw nothing wrong with his methods. "He keeps property values high," one elderly man told me defensively. "Before Dennis took over, this place was going downhill fast." But I also found quiet support. Mrs. Patel would leave homemade samosas on my porch with notes saying, simply, "Stay strong." The Nguyen family's teenage son offered to mow my lawn when Dennis started filing daily complaints about grass length. Even Mr. Fitzgerald, who'd nearly lost his home the previous year, slipped me his attorney's contact information one day at the mailbox. "Couldn't help me in time," he whispered, "but maybe she can help you." That attorney, Rebecca Chen, explained that what I really needed was hard evidence of Dennis and Sylvia's coercion, something beyond my word against theirs. "They're careful," she warned me. "They've been doing this for years without consequences because they know exactly how far they can push without leaving proof." What none of us realized was that Dennis was getting desperate. His usual tactics weren't working with me, and my consistent legal pushback was creating a paper trail he couldn't afford to have examined too closely. That's when he made his fatal mistake. He filed forged lien documents claiming I owed over $30,000 in unpaid HOA fees and fines, an astronomical sum that would force me into either bankruptcy or surrender of my property. To help me avoid foreclosure, he generously offered to buy my townhouse for roughly 60% of its market value. "It's more than fair, considering your situation," he said, sliding the deed transfer across my kitchen table. "Just sign here, and all your problems go away." When I refused, he played his final card. "Then we do this the hard way," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "Meet me at Maplewood Community Bank tomorrow at noon. Bring your checkbook, or bring a pen to sign over the deed. Those are your only options now." I called Rebecca immediately after he left. She advised me to show up at the bank, but record everything and not sign anything under duress. "If he tries to force you," she said, "find a way to alert bank staff. Financial institutions have protocols for coercion." What happened the next day at the bank would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire community of Maplewood Estates. The police arrived at Maplewood Community Bank within minutes of Martin triggering the silent alarm. 2 officers entered first, followed by a detective in plain clothes. I watched through the glass walls of Martin's office as Dennis and Sylvia shifted from intimidation to charm, their masks slipping on with practiced ease. "There's been a misunderstanding," Dennis was saying, hands spread in a gesture of innocence. His voice carried despite his attempts to keep it low. "Ms. Brooks is having some trouble paying her HOA fees. We were simply discussing payment options." The detective, a woman in her 40s with short gray-streaked hair and observant eyes, didn't appear convinced. She glanced toward Martin's office where I sat, still visibly shaken, the marks on my wrist now darkening to bruises. "Mr. Lopez," she called, "could you and Ms. Brooks join us, please?" Martin placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder before opening his office door. "Detective Reyes," he greeted her. "Thank you for coming so quickly." As we approached, I could feel the weight of every gaze in the bank. Customers had stopped pretending not to notice. Bank employees stood frozen at their stations. And my neighbors, the people who had suffered alongside me in silence, watched with a mixture of fear and hope. Detective Reyes introduced herself to me with a firm handshake. "Ms. Brooks, I understand there's been an incident. Can you tell me what happened?" Before I could answer, Dennis interjected, "This is ridiculous. We were simply—" "Mr. Crawford," Detective Reyes cut him off without raising her voice. "I didn't ask you. Please wait your turn." The subtle shift in power was electric. For perhaps the first time in 15 years, someone had publicly checked Dennis Crawford. I took a deep breath and began to explain. Not just about today, but about the systematic harassment, the fabricated violations, the escalating threats. With each word, I felt stronger, my voice steadier. "I have documentation," I said, reaching into my bag to retrieve a folder. "Copies of every violation notice, recordings of conversations, timestamps from my security cameras before they were vandalized. And I'm not the only one." I gestured around the bank lobby. "Ask any of them. They've all experienced it." Detective Reyes accepted the folder, her expression professionally neutral. "We'll review everything carefully," she promised. Then she turned to Dennis and Sylvia. "Now, your version of events?" Sylvia stepped forward, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she placed a concerned hand on Dennis's arm. "Detective, we're deeply troubled by Natalie's accusations. As HOA leadership, we have a responsibility to maintain community standards. Sometimes that means enforcing rules that aren't popular. Rules that include physical intimidation?" Detective Reyes asked, nodding toward my bruised wrist. "I never touched her," Dennis insisted, his face reddening. "She's clearly injured herself to frame me. Ask anyone here. I'm a respected community leader." Something shifted in the atmosphere of the bank lobby. A tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Then, from the back of the small crowd, a voice spoke up. "That's not true." Elena Ramirez stepped forward, hands trembling, but chin raised. "I saw Mr. Crawford grab Ms. Brooks's arm when she first entered the bank. I was depositing my paycheck at the ATM." Dennis's face contorted. "Elena, you're confused. You know how much we've done for the community. Like when you fined me $500 because my son's wheelchair ramp violated aesthetic guidelines?" Elena's voice grew stronger. "Or when you threatened to put a lien on my house if I didn't remove it within 48 hours. The dam had broken." Mr. Fitzgerald stepped forward next. "They forced me to sell my home of 30 years after my wife died," he said, his voice cracking. "Claimed my medical equipment in the front room. Violated some rule about visible storage. I couldn't pay the fines on my fixed income. One by one, my neighbors found their courage. Mrs. Patel described being fined for cooking smells that were offensive to the community. The Nguyen family revealed how Dennis had demanded cash inspection fees whenever they made repairs to their home. A young couple explained how Sylvia had spread rumors that they were running an illegal business when they started watching their neighbors' children after school. With each new testimony, Dennis and Sylvia's facade crumbled further. Their practiced smiles gave way to tight-lipped anger. Their protestations of innocence became increasingly desperate. Detective Reyes listened to each account, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When the last person finished speaking, she turned to Martin. "Mr. Lopez, does the bank have surveillance footage of today's incident?" Martin nodded. "Full coverage of the lobby, including audio. We installed a new system last month." He hesitated, then added, "And there's something else you should see, Detective." He led us to his office and unlocked a filing cabinet, retrieving several folders. "Over the past 2 years, I've noticed some concerning patterns with property transfers in Maplewood Estates. Homes selling well below market value, always to the same small group of buyers. Shell companies that trace back to Mr. Crawford, Mrs. Stanton Crawford, or their associates." He spread documents across his desk. In several cases, the sellers appeared distressed during the transactions. When I asked if they were acting under duress, they would glance at the Crawfords and insist everything was fine. I couldn't legally intervene without proof, but I started keeping records. Detective Reyes examined the documents, her expression hardening. "This suggests a pattern of organized real estate fraud. We'll need statements from everyone involved." When we returned to the lobby, Dennis and Sylvia were huddled near the entrance, speaking in urgent whispers. Their eyes darted toward the doors, calculating. "Don't even think about it," Detective Reyes warned them. "We need your statements now, and I strongly suggest you cooperate fully." Sylvia's perfect composure finally shattered. This is absurd. It's a conspiracy against us. We've done nothing but try to maintain standards in a community that would fall apart without proper oversight. Proper oversight doesn't leave bruises, I said quietly. The detective turned to the uniformed officers. Please escort Mr. Crawford and Mrs. Stanton Crawford to the station for formal questioning, and get their house keys. We'll need to execute a search warrant for HOA records and financial documents. As the officers approached, Dennis I made one last desperate attempt. You can't do this, he shouted, his face purple with rage. Do you know who I am in this town? My brother-in-law is on the city council. My friend is the sheriff, Detective Reyes finished for him. Former Sheriff Dalton retired 3 months ago. I replaced him. Her smile was cold. And I'm not part of your network, Mr. Crawford. The bank fell silent as Dennis and Sylvia were led away. Only after the police cruiser pulled from the parking lot did the tension break. People began talking all at once. Years of suppressed stories pouring out in a cathartic flood. Martin touched my shoulder gently. Are you all right, Ms. Brooks? I looked around at my neighbors, really seeing them and being seen by them for the first time. I think we all will be. Now, I answered. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of Maplewood's transformation. The days following the bank confrontation unfolded like a fever dream. Detective Reyes and her team moved with surprising efficiency, executing search warrants on the Crawfords' home and the HOA office housed in Dennis's private real estate firm. What they uncovered exceeded even my darkest suspicions. File cabinets stuffed with forged documents, backdated violation notices, spreadsheets tracking potential acquisitions, homes belonging to elderly residents, single parents, or people facing medical hardships, with notations on how to accelerate surrender. Most damning was a handwritten ledger detailing properties acquired through HOA pressure tactics and their subsequent profits. In the margin of one page next to my address, Dennis had scribbled, "High resistance, expedite removal." I learned all this during a follow-up meeting at the police station, where Detective Reyes spread evidence across the table like tarot cards revealing a dark future that would now never come to pass. This goes beyond HOA harassment, she explained. We're looking at mail fraud, wire fraud, extortion, falsifying legal documents, and criminal conspiracy. The district attorney is building a case that could put them away for years. What happens to the properties they acquired? I asked, thinking of Mr. Fitzgerald and others who had lost their homes. That's complicated, she admitted. The DA's office is working with a special prosecutor to determine if the sales can be invalidated. In cases with clear evidence of coercion, former owners might have legal recourse. I left the station feeling both vindicated and hollow. Justice was in motion, but it couldn't instantly heal a community that had been systematically terrorized for years. That evening, I sat on my small front porch watching the sunset paint Maplewood's tree-lined streets in shades of amber and gold. The neighborhood looked peaceful, unchanged, yet everything was different now. A tentative knock interrupted my thoughts. Elena Ramirez stood at the bottom of my steps, clutching a bottle of wine. I brought this, she said, holding it up like an offering. I thought, maybe we could talk? There's so much happening, and you're the one who started it all. I gestured to the empty chair beside me. I didn't start anything. I just refused to be another victim. Elena poured wine into the mismatched mugs I brought from inside. But you fought back when the rest of us were too afraid. You documented everything when we just tried to survive day to day. Her eyes filled with tears. Do you know how many nights I lay awake, hating myself for not standing up to them, for letting them humiliate me about my sons? Wheelchair ramp? I reached over and squeezed her hand. You spoke up when it mattered most. At the bank. You were the first one. Only because you showed it was possible. She sipped her wine, then asked, what happens now? With the HOA, I mean. It was a question I'd been pondering myself. According to Illinois law, with the HOA board under criminal investigation, the organization was effectively suspended. Property owners would need to elect new leadership to restore operations. I don't know, I admitted, but for the first time, it's something we get to decide together. Word spread through Maplewood like wildfire. Neighbor calling neighbor, text messages pinging between houses, impromptu gatherings at mailboxes and driveways. By nightfall, plans had formed for a community meeting at the local library the following evening. I arrived early, expecting perhaps a dozen interested residents. Instead, I found the meeting room packed wall to wall, with people spilling into the hallway. Faces I recognized but had never really known. Names I'd heard but never connected to stories. All of them united by the shared experience of living under Dennis and Sylvia's regime. Martin Lopez was there too, standing near the back. When our eyes met, he gave me an encouraging nod. His presence reminded me that allies could come from unexpected places. The meeting began awkwardly. No one quite sure who should speak first or what procedures to follow after years of Dennis controlling every community discussion. Finally, Mrs. Patel stood up. "I think," she said in her soft but clear voice, "that Natalie should facilitate tonight. She's earned that right." Before I could protest, a murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Reluctantly, I made my way to the front, where a simple podium stood. "I'm not an expert on HOAs," I began truthfully. "I'm just someone who believed we deserved better than intimidation and fear. I think we all want the same things: a fair system, transparent rules, and leadership that serves the community instead of exploiting it." For the next 3 hours, residents shared their experiences and visions for Maplewood's future. Some wanted to dissolve the HOA completely. Others argued for its reform with proper checks and balances. Heated debates erupted over what rules should remain and which should be scrapped. Throughout it all, I found myself moderating, guiding the discussion when it veered off course, ensuring every voice was heard. It was exhausting and exhilarating. Democracy in its messiest, most authentic form. As the meeting drew to a close, Mr. Fitzgerald, our eldest resident at 82, raised his hand. "I've lived in Maplewood longer than anyone here," he said, his voice wavering but determined. "Seen it change from farmland to suburbs. Had my children here. Buried my wife here." He paused, collecting himself. "What the Crawfords did to us wasn't just stealing our money or our property. They stole our community, our sense of belonging to something good." The room fell silent, every person feeling the weight of his words. "Tonight," he continued, "for the first time in 15 years, I'm sitting in a room with neighbors who know my name, who care about my voice. That's what we need to rebuild. Not just new HOA rules, but the community itself." His simple wisdom cut through all the procedural debates. By meeting's end, we had formed a transitional committee to manage immediate needs while developing a new HOA charter, one with term limits, transparent finances, and protections against the abuses we'd endured. To my surprise, I was unanimously nominated to chair the committee. "I'm not qualified," I protested. "I've only lived here 2 years. Elena stood up. "You're exactly what we need. Someone who sees Maplewood for what it could be, not what it's been." As the crowd dispersed into the warm evening, neighbors lingered in the parking lot, exchanging phone numbers and making plans. I stood apart, overwhelmed by the responsibility suddenly placed on my shoulders. Martin approached, hands in his pockets. "You did well in there," he said. "I have no idea what I'm doing," I confessed. His laugh was warm, genuine. "Welcome to leadership? No one ever does." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think they chose wisely. You showed courage when it counted." As we talked, I realized Martin wasn't just the bank manager who'd helped me that crucial day. He was a person with his own story. A divorced father of 2 teenagers, a community college accounting instructor, a man who'd noticed patterns of injustice and documented them quietly, waiting for the right moment to act. "Why did you help me?" I asked suddenly. "You could have just looked the other way like everyone else." Martin's expression grew serious. "My parents lost their home in a similar scheme when I was in college. Predatory HOA, falsified violations, the works. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late." He looked out at the dispersing neighbors. "When I saw what was happening in Maplewood, I promised myself I'd be ready if someone ever fought back." As we parted ways in the library parking lot, I felt a connection I hadn't expected. Not just to Martin, but to the community itself. For the first time since moving to Maplewood, I wasn't just a homeowner defending her property. I was part of something larger, something in the process of healing. The Crawfords had spent years dividing us, isolating us, making each of us feel alone in our struggles. Their greatest crime, I realized, wasn't financial. It was convincing us we had no power together. The initial euphoria of Dennis and Sylvia's downfall soon gave way to the complicated reality of rebuilding our community. As chair of the transitional committee, I found myself buried in paperwork, untangling the Crawfords' financial schemes, identifying legitimate HOA assets, and discovering just how deeply their corruption had penetrated Maplewood estates. "They were skimming at least 30% off the top," explained Josephine Yang, a retired accountant who volunteered to review the HOA books. We sat at my dining room table, surrounded by spreadsheets and bank statements. Maintenance contracts went to companies they owned. Insurance was routed through Sylvia's cousin's agency at inflated premiums. Even the landscaping company was owned by Dennis's brother. I rubbed my temples, fighting a growing headache. So every time we paid our HOA dues, you were directly funding their lifestyle, Josephine confirmed, adjusting her reading glasses. That lake house they bragged about at every HOA meeting? Paid for with misappropriated funds. The criminal investigation was proceeding in parallel with our community efforts. Dennis and Sylvia had been released on bail, but were under court order to stay away from Maplewood Estates and have no contact with residents. Their assets were frozen, and they'd been forced to surrender their passports. Despite these restrictions, their influence lingered. Anonymous letters appeared in some mailboxes, warning that property values would plummet without the Crawford's strict oversight. Longtime allies of Dennis made ominous predictions about declining standards and undesirable elements moving in. These tactics might have worked before, but Maplewood had changed. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other warmly. Spontaneous block parties sprang up on weekends. When Mr. Nguyen's daughter got accepted to college, the entire street gathered for a celebration. Still, rebuilding trust wasn't simple. At our weekly committee meetings, debates often grew heated. How strict should architectural guidelines be? Should we allow home-based businesses? What about rentals, the very properties Dennis had accumulated through his schemes? We need rules or this place will turn into a dump, insisted Theodore Wells, a retiree who'd always supported Dennis's policies, though he claimed ignorance of the corruption. Rules, yes. Harassment, no, countered Elena. My son should be able to have a wheelchair ramp without being treated like a criminal. Navigating these conflicts tested my patience and diplomacy. I found myself mediating between residents who wanted to abolish all restrictions and those who feared change would destroy the neighborhood's character. One evening, exhausted after a particularly contentious meeting, I called Martin. Over the past weeks, our professional relationship had evolved into friendship. He'd become my sounding board, offering perspective when community politics threatened to overwhelm me. I'm not cut out for this, I confessed after explaining the latest dispute. A heated argument about whether garden gnomes constituted tasteful yard decor. I'm a designer, not a politician. Maybe someone else should lead the committee. Martin's laugh warmed me through the phone. You're doing exactly what a good leader should, letting everyone have their say, even when it's about something as ridiculous as garden gnomes. But we're moving so slowly. People expect results. And all we do is argue. Democracy is messy, he reminded me. The Crawfords ran things efficiently because they didn't care what anyone thought. That's not the community you're trying to build. His words stayed with me as I walked around Maplewood the next morning. The neighborhood was coming alive. Children waiting for school buses, people walking dogs, residents tending gardens that were finally free from Dennis's arbitrary restrictions. Near the community playground, I spotted Mrs. Patel removing graffiti from a bench. I joined her, taking a scrub brush from her bucket. The Crawfords would have fined whoever lived nearest to this bench, Mrs. Patel remarked as we worked side by side. As if proximity made you responsible for teenage vandals. We're creating something different, I said, echoing Martin's sentiment from the night before. Mrs. Patel smiled. Yes, we are. It's slower, but it's real. She paused, then added, You know, I've lived here 12 years, and this is the first time I've felt like my voice matters. That conversation sparked an idea. Later that day, I emailed the committee with a proposal. Neighborhood working groups. Instead of trying to solve everything at once, we would divide into teams focusing on specific areas. Landscaping, architectural guidelines, financial oversight, community events. Everyone brings different expertise, I explained at our next meeting. Let's use that instead of arguing in circles. To my relief, the idea resonated. Residents volunteered based on their interests and skills. Elena led the accessibility team, ensuring guidelines, accommodated people with disabilities. Mr. Fitzgerald, despite his age, became our community historian, providing context for why certain rules existed in the first place. Josephine naturally headed financial oversight. Even Theodore Wells found his place, channeling his desire for order into cataloging community maintenance needs rather than policing his neighbors. Within weeks, the working groups had drafted proposals that balanced reasonable standards with individual freedom. No more arbitrary fines or selective enforcement. Clear appeals processes. transparent financial reporting. At the community-wide vote to approve our new charter, I stood before my neighbors feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. What we're creating isn't just a new HOA, I told them. It's a new relationship with each other. One based on respect instead of fear. The charter passed unanimously. As people mingled afterward, sharing refreshments and conversation, I found myself standing beside Martin, who'd attended as a supportive community partner. "Congratulations," he said, handing me a cup of punch. "From victim to community leader in 3 months. Quite a journey." I laughed. I never wanted either role. I just wanted to live in peace and do my work. Sometimes life has other plans. His eyes held mine a moment longer than necessary. "Speaking of work, how's your design business doing through all this?" The question caught me off guard. In the chaos of community rebuilding, I'd neglected my freelance practice. Clients had been understanding initially, but deadlines were looming, and new projects had dried up while I focused on Maplewood. "It's suffering," I admitted. "I need to refocus before I lose everything I built." Martin nodded thoughtfully. "The bank is looking to rebrand our community outreach materials. Nothing fancy, just some brochures and a new logo. Small project, but it might help you get back into the swing of things." I started to thank him for the opportunity, then hesitated. "Wait, is this a pity project? Because I don't need—" "It's definitely not," he interrupted. "The marketing team has been after me to update our materials for months. You're qualified, local, and I trust your judgment. The fact that it might help you rebuild your client base is a bonus." His sincerity was evident, and I found myself smiling. "In that case, I accept. Thank you." As we parted ways, I realized how much had changed in a few short months. The neighborhood that once felt like a battlefield now felt like home. The people who had been silent strangers were now allies and friends. And Martin, the unexpected hero of that fateful day at the bank, had become something more than just an ally. What exactly, I wasn't yet sure, but for the first time, since moving to Maplewood, I felt excited about the possibilities ahead. What I didn't know was that Dennis and Sylvia Crawford weren't finished with me, or with Maplewood. Their most dangerous move was yet to come. The preliminary hearing for the Crawford case was scheduled for mid-October, just as Maplewood's maple trees blazed into their namesake autumn colors. Detective Reyes had kept me updated throughout the investigation, preparing me for my role as a key witness. "The evidence is overwhelming," she assured me during one of our preparation sessions. "Financial records, testimony from dozens of residents, surveillance footage from the bank. The DA is confident this will move to trial." What neither of us anticipated was the Crawfords' desperate countermove. It began with a letter delivered to my door by courier. Thick legal paper bearing the letterhead of Whitman & Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the state. "Dear Ms. Brooks," it read, "this letter constitutes formal notice of a civil action filed against you for defamation of character, tortious interference with business relationships, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Our clients, Mr. Dennis Crawford and Mrs. Sylvia Stanton Crawford, seek damages in the amount of $2.5 million. The letter continued with legal jargon and thinly veiled threats, but the message was clear. They were suing me personally, separate from the criminal case against them. My hands shook as I called Detective Reyes. "They can't do this, can they? Sue me for reporting their crimes? It's a classic intimidation tactic," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They're hoping you'll recant your testimony to make the lawsuit go away. I've seen this before with wealthy defendants. But $2.5 million? I don't have that kind of money. I'm a freelancer who can barely keep up with her mortgage." "They know that. They don't expect to win. They expect you to be scared into silence." I called Rebecca Chen next, the attorney who had advised me before the bank confrontation. After reviewing the lawsuit, she confirmed what Detective Reyes had suggested. "This is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. A slap suit," she explained. "Designed to intimidate and drain your resources, not to actually win on legal merits." "So what do?" I asked, trying to keep panic from my voice. "Illinois has anti-slap statutes. We file a motion to dismiss and request they pay your legal fees when we win." Her voice softened. "But Natalie, I have to be honest. Fighting this will be expensive upfront, even if we eventually recover costs. My retainer alone is $5,000. My stomach dropped. Between the time I'd devoted to community rebuilding and the clients I'd lost, my savings had dwindled dramatically. The bank project Martin had offered was just beginning and wouldn't pay for weeks. "I need to think about this." I said finally. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the lawsuit. The Crawfords had found my vulnerability. They couldn't intimidate me with HOA fines anymore, but they could drown me in legal fees. That evening, I walked to the community playground, seeking fresh air to clear my head. The sunset painted the sky in streaks of pink and gold, a beauty that seemed at odds with my inner turmoil. I didn't realize I wasn't alone until Elena's voice broke the silence. "You look like someone stole your dog," she said, settling beside me on the bench. The simple observation broke something in me. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. The lawsuit, the impossible legal fees, my dwindling savings. "They can't get to all of us anymore, so they're targeting you specifically," she said when I finished, anger edging her words. "After everything you've done for Maplewood." "I don't regret standing up to them," I said. "I just don't know how to fight this next battle." Elena squeezed my hand. "You don't have to fight it alone." The next morning, I woke to a text from Elena. "Meet at the community center at 6:30 tonight. Important." When I arrived, the parking lot was full. Inside, at least 50 Maplewood residents had gathered. Faces from the committee, neighbors I'd gotten to know over recent months. Even a few I still only recognized in passing. Elena stood at the front of the room, a determined set to her shoulders. "Thanks for coming on short notice," she addressed the crowd. "Most of you know about the criminal case against the Crawfords. What you might not know is that they've filed a personal lawsuit against Natalie, a $2.5 million intimidation tactic to silence her before the criminal trial." Murmurs of outrage rippled through the room. "Natalie stood up for all of us when no one else would," Elena continued. "She risked everything to break the Crawfords' hold on Maplewood. Now it's our turn to stand with her." Mrs. Patel stepped forward. "I've spoken with my son. He's an attorney in Chicago. He's willing to take the case pro bono." Josephine Yang raised her hand. "And I've drafted a budget for additional legal expenses. If everyone in Maplewood contributes what they can, even just $20, we can create a defense fund." Mr. Fitzgerald stood shakily, leaning on his cane. "I may not have much, but I'm putting in $500. That's what I paid in bogus fines the month before they forced me out of my home." One by one, neighbors stepped forward, offering legal contacts, research assistance, funds for the defense, emotional support. The Nguyen family volunteered to cook meals so I could focus on the case. Theodore Wells, of all people, offered to review HOA records from his time on the board for evidence of the Crawfords' long-standing pattern of abuse. Martin was there too, standing quietly at the back until the practical matters had been addressed. Then he approached the front. "Maplewood Community Bank has a vested interest in preventing real estate fraud in our service area," he said, his professional tone belied by the warmth in his eyes when they met mine. "We've decided to file an amicus brief supporting Ms. Brooks's anti-SLAPP motion, and our legal team will coordinate with Mrs. Patel's son on the defense strategy." By meeting's end, I was overwhelmed. Not by the lawsuit, but by the community's response to it. What the Crawfords had intended as my isolation had instead revealed the strength of the bonds we'd built. As people dispersed, Martin approached me. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. I searched for the right word. "Stunned? I never expected this kind of support." "I'm not surprised at all," he said. "You showed them what courage looks like. Now they're returning the favor." We walked to the parking lot together, the evening air crisp with the promise of autumn. At my car, Martin hesitated. "Natalie, I've been wanting to ask, once all this legal business settles down, would you consider having dinner with me? Not to discuss bank marketing or community issues, just dinner." His unexpected vulnerability made me smile. "Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Lopez?" "I am, probably with terrible timing, given everything you're dealing with." I surprised myself by laughing, a genuine unburdened sound that felt foreign after weeks of stress. "Actually, your timing is perfect. I could use something normal and good to look forward to." His answering smile warmed me more than it should have. "Then it's a date, after we deal with the Crawfords. One last time." What neither of us knew then was how desperate Dennis and Sylvia would become as their legal position deteriorated, or how their final act of retaliation would threaten not just me, but everything we'd built in Maplewood. The weeks leading up to the hearing passed in a blur of legal preparations and community solidarity. Mrs. Patel's son, Vikram, proved to be exactly the attorney I needed, sharp, strategic, and personally invested in seeing the Crawfords brought to justice. Their lawsuit is textbook intimidation, he explained during one of our strategy sessions at my dining room table. They've made procedural errors that would embarrass a first-year law student. Either they're desperate or they never expected this to actually go before a judge. What do you mean? I asked, sorting through the stack of affidavits we'd collected from Maplewood residents. Vikram leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile playing at his lips. They thought you'd be alone and terrified. They thought you'd beg to settle. Agree to recant your criminal testimony in exchange for them dropping the civil suit. He shook his head. They never expected you to have the resources to fight back. Thanks to the Community Defense Fund, I did have those resources. Nearly every household in Maplewood had contributed something, from Mr. Fitzgerald's $500 to Children's Lemonade Stand proceeds. The donations weren't just financial support. They were votes of confidence, statements that Maplewood stood united against intimidation. Meanwhile, the criminal case against the Crawfords continued building. Detective Reyes had uncovered evidence that their scheme extended beyond Maplewood to 2 other communities in neighboring counties. Former residents who had been forced out years earlier were coming forward with their stories, creating a damning pattern of predatory behavior spanning over a decade. The morning of the civil hearing dawned crisp and clear. I dressed carefully in a simple navy suit, professional but not flashy, Vikram had advised. The courthouse steps were crowded with the Maplewood residents who had taken time off work to show support. Elena had organized a carpool system to ensure everyone who wanted to attend could be there. Martin waited near the entrance, looking sharp in a charcoal suit that softened his usual banker's formality. When our eyes met, he gave me an encouraging smile. "Ready?" he asked, falling into step beside me. "As I'll ever be," I replied, trying to ignore the butterflies in my stomach. Despite Vikram's confidence, the sight of the imposing courthouse made the stakes feel suddenly, overwhelmingly real. Inside, the courtroom was already nearly full. On one side sat rows of Maplewood residents. On the other, just a handful of people, mostly men in expensive suits, whom I assumed were associated with the Crawfords' legal team. Dennis and Sylvia themselves sat at the plaintiff's table, looking noticeably diminished from their Maplewood glory days. Dennis had lost weight, his once imposing frame now almost gaunt. Sylvia's immaculate appearance remained, but tension lined her face, aging her beyond her years. Neither looked in my direction as Vikram and I took our seats at the defense table. The hearing began with standard procedural formalities. The Crawfords' attorney, a silver-haired man with an air of practiced gravitas, presented their case first, painting me as a vindictive troublemaker who had orchestrated a smear campaign against upstanding community leaders. Ms. Brooks moved to Maplewood with an agenda, he claimed, pacing before the judge, when Mr. and Mrs. Crawford simply attempted to uphold the community standards that all residents had agreed to. She retaliated with false accusations and enlisted others in her vendetta. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I marveled at how completely they had inverted reality. Beside me, Vikram remained unruffled, occasionally making notes but otherwise displaying the confidence of someone holding a winning hand. When our turn came, Vikram approached the bench with calm authority. "Your Honor, this lawsuit is a textbook slap case, a strategic lawsuit against public participation designed to intimidate a witness in an ongoing criminal investigation." He gestured toward me. Ms. Brooks didn't create these allegations out of thin air. She documented systematic abuses, reported them to appropriate authorities, and cooperated with a police investigation that has since uncovered extensive evidence of fraud. He presented our motion to dismiss, methodically dismantling the Crawfords' claims while emphasizing the anti-SLAPP protections under Illinois law. Furthermore, he continued, we have affidavits from 57 Maplewood residents describing similar experiences with the plaintiffs. We have bank records showing suspicious property transfers. We have evidence that Mr. Crawford specifically targeted Ms. Brooks after she refused to surrender her property. He paused. And perhaps most importantly, we have this. Vikram produced a flash drive, which the court clerk connected to the room's audiovisual system. On the large display screen appeared security footage from Maplewood Community Bank, crystal clear video showing Dennis grabbing my wrist, Sylvia digging her nails into my arm, and the moment I passed the desperate note to the cashier. The courtroom fell silent as the footage played. Even with the volume low, Dennis's threatening whispers were clearly audible. "Sign the deed, Natalie. Hand over your property, or you'll regret it." When the video ended, Vikram simply said, "The plaintiffs are not the victims here, Your Honor. They are attempting to use this court to continue a pattern of intimidation that has finally been exposed." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had watched the proceedings with increasing displeasure, didn't take long to reach her decision. This court finds the plaintiff's claims to be without merit and clearly intended to intimidate a witness in an ongoing criminal matter, she declared. The motion to dismiss is granted, with prejudice. Furthermore, under Illinois anti-SLAPP provisions, the plaintiffs will pay all of the defendant's legal costs associated with this frivolous action. Relief washed over me, though I maintained my composure until we left the courtroom. In the hallway, surrounded by celebrating neighbors, I finally allowed myself to exhale. Martin appeared at my side, his eyes shining. "It's over," he said, squeezing my hand. "Not quite," I replied, thinking of the criminal case still ahead. "But it's a start." As we descended the courthouse steps, Vikram fielding questions from local reporters who had gathered to cover the case, I spotted Dennis and Sylvia exiting through a side door, heads down, hurrying toward a waiting car. For a moment, our eyes met. Across the plaza, Sylvia's face twisted with hatred, while Dennis looked simply defeated. I felt no triumph in their humiliation, only sadness for the years of fear they had inflicted on so many, and relief that their power was finally broken. What I didn't realize, watching them drive away, was that Dennis Crawford had nothing left to lose, and one final act of vengeance planned before his criminal trial began. The call came at 2:17 a.m., jolting me from sleep. Martin's voice on the other end was tight with urgency. "Natalie, are you home? Are you safe?" "Yes," I answered, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "There's a fire at the community center. Fire department says it was deliberately set." He paused. "And all our new HOA records were stored there." I threw on clothes and raced to the scene. By the time I arrived, flames had engulfed the small building that housed our community office. Fire trucks surrounded the area, their lights painting the night in surreal flashes of red and white. Neighbors stood watching in stunned silence as firefighters battled the blaze. Detective Reyes was already there, talking to the fire chief. When she saw me, she broke away to approach. "Someone broke in, doused the office with accelerant, and torched it," she said without preamble. "Security cameras were disabled first. Professional job." "The Crawfords," I said. It wasn't a question. Her expression confirmed my suspicion. "Dennis disappeared after the hearing today. Didn't return home. His lawyer claims no knowledge of his whereabouts." "What about Sylvia?" "At home, with what appears to be a genuine alibi. She was on a video call with her sister when the fire started." I stared at the burning building, watching as the physical manifestation of our community's rebirth crumbled into ash. All our records, financial documents, meeting minutes, evidence of their schemes that we were still cataloging, which was likely the point, Detective Reyes said grimly. By dawn, the fire was contained, but the community center was a total loss. As residents gathered to survey the damage in the gray morning light, I felt a collective determination replace our initial shock. Theodore Wells organized a cleanup crew. The Nguyen family arrived with coffee and pastries for the firefighters and volunteers. Mrs. Patel started a digital recovery initiative, contacting residents for copies of any HOA documents they might have saved. "They think they've destroyed our community by burning down a building," Elena said, standing beside me as we watched the activity. "They still don't understand what we've built here." She was right. While Dennis had targeted our physical records, he'd failed to grasp that Maplewood's transformation wasn't contained in paper documents. It lived in the connections we'd forged, the trust we'd established, the systems of mutual support we'd created. Dennis Crawford was apprehended 3 days later at a bus station 2 states away, carrying fake identification and $50,000 in cash. The evidence linking him to the arson was irrefutable: gas station security footage, accelerant residue on clothing found in his motel room, cell phone location data, placing him near the community center at the time of the fire. Sylvia, despite her alibi for the arson, was charged as a co-conspirator in their original schemes. Their criminal trial proceeded swiftly, with testimony from dozens of current and former Maplewood residents. I took the stand on the third day, recounting not just my personal experience, but the systematic patterns we had uncovered during our community rebuilding. When the verdict came, it was decisive: guilty on all counts. Dennis received 15 years for fraud, racketeering, extortion, and arson. Sylvia, 8 years for her role in the fraud scheme. The judge ordered full restitution to identified victims, though we all knew that many who had lost their homes years ago would never be fully compensated for what they'd endured. As winter gave way to spring, Maplewood began its own renewal. We rebuilt the community center, this time with a design that reflected our values. Accessible to all, with transparent glass walls symbolizing our commitment to openness, and a community garden surrounding it. Martin and I had our long-delayed dinner date the night after the sentencing. Away from the drama and legal battles, we discovered a connection that went beyond our shared experience of standing up to the Crawfords. His thoughtfulness balanced my occasionally impulsive nature. My creativity complemented his methodical approach. What had begun as an alliance of necessity blossomed into something neither of us had expected. 1 year to the day after that fateful confrontation at the bank, we gathered at the new community center for a celebration, not just of the rebuilt facility, but of Maplewood itself. Families brought dishes representing their cultural heritage for a potluck dinner. Children played on the new playground equipment. Former residents who had been forced out under the Crawfords regime were welcomed back as honored guests. Mr. Fitzgerald, now using a wheelchair but still sharp as ever, raised a toast to Maplewood, not just houses on streets, but a true community where everyone belongs. As twilight settled over the gathering, I found a quiet moment alone on the center's porch, watching fireflies begin to dot the community garden. Martin joined me, slipping his hand into mine. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "I was just thinking about that day at the bank," I replied. How terrified I was. How alone I felt. And now? I gestured toward the people laughing and talking on the lawn. Neighbors who had become friends. Strangers who had become allies. Elena chasing her son as he zoomed around in his wheelchair. Mrs. Patel teaching a group of children a traditional dance. The Nguyen family setting up a dessert table overflowing with treats from their bakery. "Now I understand what Mr. Fitzgerald meant about belonging," I said. "I came to Maplewood looking for independence, a place that was just mine. What I found instead was something much more valuable." Martin smiled. "A community. A home," I corrected, "with people worth fighting for." Later that evening, as residents began to disperse, Elena's son wheeled up to me, holding a small, handmade card. On it, in careful children's handwriting, were the words, "Thanks for making everyone safe." The simple message brought tears to my eyes, echoing my thoughts exactly. The Crawfords had ruled through fear, isolation, and intimidation. They had counted on our silence, on our belief that we were powerless alone, but they had never understood the true source of power, not in rules or threats or money, but in people standing together, refusing to be silenced, refusing to surrender what matters most. As Martin and I walked home under the stars, the lights of Maplewood twinkling around us like earthbound constellations, I felt a peace I'd never known before. The journey had been harder than I ever imagined when I moved to this quiet suburb 2 years ago. The cost had been higher, but the reward? This. Renewed community, these genuine connections, this sense of belonging, was beyond measure. "Bullies only win when we stay quiet," I murmured, almost to myself. "The moment we speak, their power disappears." Martin squeezed my hand in understanding, and together we continued down the street that had become, against all odds, exactly where we both belonged.